The movie opens with a camera focused on a man sitting on a couch named Ray and the friendly voice of Steve coming through the intercom. Steve asks Ray for permission to administer the G46 drug, to which Ray consents. After hearing the agreement, Steve administers the drug and tells the man a silly joke, which Ray finds hilarious. Steve's colleague then begins to tell Ray facts, including that he was serving 4 consecutive life sentences. But Ray is unable to stop laughing, finding everything hilarious. Happy that the effects of the drug are potent, Steve thanks Ray and sends him back. The setting shifts, and we witness Steve's arrival at the SpiderHead Penitentiary and Research Center, situated on a secluded island. Inside one of the private rooms, an inmate named Jeff is abruptly awakened by a booming voice over the intercom, summoning him to the dock for field testing. Steve and his colleague Mark, as well as a few guards, take Jeff to a different area on a boat, his eyes blindfolded. When they arrive, Jeff is given a different drug, which makes the world seem incredibly beautiful. As he watched his colorful environment, Jeff was stuck in awe, phrasing all the gorgeous things he was witnessing. Jeff is unaware that he's been taken to see a giant factory releasing waste products and toxic gases into the environment. After Jeff finishes with his tests, he's taken back to the research facility, where he finds Lizzy making snacks while listening to music on headphones. Having had his dinner with Lizzy and spending some time with her, Jeff goes back to his room. As he's sketching using his small electronic device, he remembers his fast and how he had killed his best friend while driving drunk. The following day, Jeff is called into the viewing room and is placed in front of another inmate called Heather. Steve pushes the two to interact with one another, urging them to rate their attractiveness level. After hearing their answers, Steve asks if they acknowledge being given the N40 drug, to which they both consent. As soon as the drug begins to work in their system, the two inmates are overwhelmed by the attraction that they have to each other, unable to control themselves and being intimate in the viewing room while Steve and Mark observe. Once they're done, the two lay on the ground cuddling and talking about how much they were in love with one another. A few hours later, Jeff and Heather begin to realize what they've done and awkwardly start getting dressed, unable to look each other in the eye. In the following days, Jeff is made to experience the love drug with another patient, Sarah, whom he had at first glance found very unattractive, but is convinced otherwise by the chemicals coursing in his body. After his second experience, Jeff begins to feel bad about what they're making him do. A few days later, Jeff is called into the observation center, where he sees Heather and Sarah sitting in the viewing room. Indicating toward the two women, Steve asks Jeff to choose which one of the women he would be okay with giving Darkenflox, a drug that causes terrible fear and anxiety. Jeff is reluctant to name a person because he had first-hand experience with the drug and is unwilling to make the women go through the trauma. He also explains to Steve that he has no special feelings for either woman and that his choice would be random. Realizing that they need to study the love drug more, Steve decides that he won't force Jeff to make a decision and allows the woman to leave. Before Jeff can head out, Steve stops him and expresses how important his involvement as well as insights is to helping them change the world. Back at the facility, Jeff is playing a video game in the common room when he's called by one of the guards, indicating that he can make a call since it was a Friday. Heading outside, Jeff calls his ex-girlfriend, Emma, and leaves her a message. A few days later, Jeff finds himself in the viewing room in front of another inmate called Robbie and is shocked that it's a man. Panicking, he starts to loudly express his disagreement with going forward, frightened by the idea of what the love drug is going to do to them. Telling them that it wasn't what they thought, Steve lets them sit there for a while until he finally tells them the experiment is over and that they can return. Jeff remains in the viewing room for a few minutes and then hurries into the control center where Steve and Mark are watching. Inside, he finds Sarah sitting next to Steve as he had been a few days ago, and realizes that they had given her the same choice he was given about the Darkenflox. Angry about the sexual promiscuity, Jeff begins to yell at Steve, but he's reminded by the project head that his presence there was a privilege and that he had chosen to be there. Realizing that he's crossed the line, Jeff apologizes and promises to uphold their agreement moving forward. After the long day of tests, Steve walks Mark, who's going to the mainland for the weekend, to the door and encourages him to have some fun because he had noticed Mark's grim face due to the recent mention of Darkenflox. Returning to his room, Steve opens some music to relax, then administers the love drug to himself, enjoying the high. A few days later, Steve and Mark are in the control room, where they're getting ready to start their day of testing. Steve asks Mark to fill up his MobiPark, the device attached to their backs that administers the drug, as he had gone through many of the vials. Mark voices his concerns about Steve's overuse of the drug, but Steve is adamant that he has everything under control. A few seconds later, Jeff arrives, and Steve explains that since he wasn't able to choose between the girls the other day, they had decided to give Heather Darkenflox and observe his reaction. Jeff is uncomfortable with the idea and refuses to consent to be given the drug that would make him more articulate about what he observes. Steve attempts to guilt trip Jeff by mentioning all the nice things that he's done for him, but fails to push him over the edge. Seeing that he's adamant, Steve tells him that he'll make a call to the committee about changing the test and leaves the room. Jeff is unaware that Steve has only gone to the common room to get coffee, deceiving the prisoner. When he returns to the viewing room, Steve lies and tells Jeff that the committee would not change their minds and that he has to go through with the test, threatening to send him back to the prison he came from. Having no other choice, Jeff agrees to the trial. Once they administer Darkenflox to Heather, Steve asks Jeff to express everything he's feeling about watching her reactions to the drug. While they're jotting down what he's saying, Heather begins to react aggressively, sustaining damage to her MobiPark and causing it to flood her system with Darkenflox. Suddenly, Heather gets out of control and, unable to resist the effect of the drug, commits suicide. Shocked by the incident, Steve rushes out of the room, accidentally dropping his keys to the drawer where he keeps his journal. Seeing the keys, Jeff hurriedly picks it up and uses it to go through Steve's notes. Inside, he discovers clues that indicate the pharmaceutical company belonged to Steve and that their fates were not decided by a committee, but instead were determined by a bingo game. Suddenly, Jeff realizes that Steve has discovered he's lost his keys and sees him rushing back to the control room, forcing him to put everything back as it was and drop the keys by the door. That night, Mark tries to convince Steve that they need to report what happened, but Steve refuses, explaining that if anyone found out, they would get shut down. Steve then goes to console Jeff and offers to give him something for how he's feeling, providing the two of them with the happy drug. The two men share a moment as they discuss their traumatic pasts, laughing as though it was just a joke. A few days later, Lizzy is forced to experience a drug that makes you scared of the things that are bad for you and is traumatized by the feeling. After returning to her quarters, Lizzy shares what she's gone through with Jeff, who reveals details about the accident that put him in jail. He tells Lizzy that his best friend wasn't the only person who had died that night. His girlfriend, Emma, had died in the explosion that followed the crash. Feeling sorry for him, Lizzy consoles him, and the two share an intimate moment. After they're done, the two go to the open kitchen for some tea and are surprised by Steve, who notices the bond that the two are beginning to share. The following day, Steve calls Jeff to the viewing room and tells him that he has to administer Darkenflox to a person he's never shared the love drug with. Fearing where this is going, Jeff asks who it is and is shocked when he finds out it's Lizzy. When Jeff refuses to administer the drug, Steve tells him to take the night to think about his decision and sends him on his way. That night, when Mark comes to Jeff's room to fill up his Moby Park, Jeff confronts him about what they're doing in the company and finds out about the secret drug, B6. The next day, Jeff and Steve meet at the control room, while Lizzy is sitting in the viewing room waiting for her next test. Despite having had time to think, Jeff still refuses to administer the Darkenflox to Lizzy, which angers Steve. Unable to persuade him with threats, Steve opts to tell him why Lizzy went to prison. Overcome by guilt, Lizzy reveals that she had killed her 9-month-old daughter after forgetting her in a car for 3 hours while she went to work. Although Steve had expected Jeff to be pushed over the edge by the information, he's surprised when Jeff releases Darkenflox and the phobia drug into his system. Watching Steve cower in the corner, Jeff confronts Steve about the B6 drug and how he's using it to control people. Steve confesses that the whole time the inmates were trying to get experimented on, they were under the influence of the control drug. He also tells Jeff that his sentence had ended 7 months ago, while Lizzy's ended the previous week. Angry at the sudden revelation, Jeff tries to force Steve to reveal to the world what he's been doing to the people in his facility. Angry, Steve floods Lizzy's system with Darkenflox, forcing Jeff to attack him. After a brief struggle, Jeff damages Steve's Moby Pack and tries to escape with Lizzy, but Steve tries to stop him by ordering the other inmates to attack him. The two fight their way out of the facility, but are beaten to the water plane by Steve, whose Moby Park malfunction caused him to crash. Lizzy and Jeff take the boat parked in front of the facility and drive away to freedom. And that brings us to the end of this movie recap. This one was a trip. I mean, Steve is on some serious mad scientist level stuff right here. But the plot was pretty interesting. Do you agree? Or do you have some different thoughts on the movie? Let me know in the comment section below. Hopefully Lizzy and Jeff got their happy ending. And hey, if you want to see more movie recaps, then click one of the videos that are on screen now. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way until the end of this video. We've got more movie recaps in production for you, so make sure you stay tuned to our channel for more movie recaps. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.